Most of Disney's Golden Age films are quite family friendly, but often we do see some dark and sometimes adult themes in their movies.
Jafar wanting to marry Jasmine in Aladdin, the brutal cold heart depths in Mulan, the bloodthirsty mercenaries in Atlantis. But the darkest Disney movie of them all would have to be Hunchback of Notre Dame. If those of you know about the tragic legend, you could already tell Disney was diving into a deeper story than most just by creating this.
Being that this was a Disney family film, of course they couldn't keep everything of the original storyline, otherwise they'd traumatize families for generations. But they did, however, keep the essence of the story. That's why the movie is so dark and sometimes downright creepy.
Most of the dark content would have to be established through the movie's villain, a haughty judge known as Frollo, or as we like to call him, Frollo.
It just helps keep the tension off the movie. This movie was set in the 15th century Paris, where magicians and gypsies were known as people who did witchcraft, which not all of them were. Some of them were just street performers. But the fact and how he goes about it, hunting down every gypsy family to punish or even kill them, is what makes him so dark.
In the prologue alone, we see the arrest of a father, the killing of a mother, and attempted murder of the baby, which turns out to be Quasimodo. For the first time, Disney wasn't afraid to dive into the corrupted discrimination people had in those times for those who were considered unrighteous, even though they were filled with corruptiveness themselves.
While gypsies and thieves were considered scums, most had good in their hearts. Unlike Frollo, who was considered high and righteous, actually manifested evil.
Frollo having spilt blood on Notre Dame steps, which in real life there aren't any, I might add.
Well, definitely not at the front, not as much as what they depicted in the movie.
He decides to raise a deformed child in fear of his soul, rather than in pity of his sin.
The only time this character does something good, and it was still for a selfish motive.
There's even a part in the song where he mentions that the child could be of very good use to him. So that's like selfishness all over.
As he raises Quasimodo, he teaches him that his mother abandoned him when he was young because of his deformities.
Not only does Frollo use lies to raise Quasi, but an intense form of gaslighting, allowing him to think that he's ugly, a monster, and that nobody in the world will love him. And all this time he is unaware he's being raised by his mother's murderer.
So in the first 10 minutes, there is murder, corruption, gaslighting, deception, discrimination. How is this a Disney film?
When years pass and Quasi turns into the famous bell ringer of Notre Dame, he comes to meet a beautiful gypsy known as Esmeralda, who seeks justice on those persecuted by people like Frollo.
Through an unholy wrath, Frollo begins to hate Esmeralda, but because of her seductive beauty, he begins to grow a sinful lust for her. Not many G-rated movies go into this sort of theme, so how Disney pulled it off, I will never know.
Now, the controversy in this film is probably the fact that Frollo is so much older than Esmeralda, but then again, people are saying that it made no difference with Jafar wanting to marry Jasmine, where the age gap might have actually been bigger.
But you see, the difference with that, however, is that Jafar wanted the power more than anything, and Jasmine was sort of just another way to get power, to marry her.
There was no feelings or anything.
Even afterwards, when he wanted her to fall desperately in love with him, it's just so he can have a beautiful queen as his bride. But Frollo, however, was lusting after Esmeralda to a fact that he's going to kill every single gypsy just so he can have her. That's how dark this movie is. Even when he sang in the song Hellfire to have mercy on her, he threatened that she must be his, otherwise she must die. That is a sinful lust.
This is where Disney didn't sugarcoat the cruel punishments of those times. We had people being put in stocks, getting whipped, burned at the stake alive, and then there was the most gruesome death of them all, Frollo's death. Plunging headfirst into a fiery pool of lava. In a way, it was almost symbolizing how he'd burn in the fiery pits of hell, just like what he sang in Hellfire.
The lust he had for Esmeralda was gonna be his downfall. Foreshadowing in its finest. Diving a little bit off the darkness chart, I also love in this movie how Quasimodo was one of the first heroes who didn't get the girl. Even though we were hoping for it so very much, he'd be the first deformed person to actually get the beautiful girl. We loved how he still took the high road and let Phoebus and Esmeralda be together for their love for each other.
And also, despite the fact that he was raised by the villain of the story and was led to think he was a monster, he didn't live up to that monster name. Actually, now that I think about going back on that, Quasimodo never actually said he loved Esmeralda. Like, sure, the gargoyles kept saying she loves you and all that, but at the end of the day, he never really had a romantic interest for her. And I guess that's probably because Frollo kept bombarding him saying that no one was gonna love him. So it was more the fact that he craved the love she gave him, but
she was the first person to actually give him the time of day to be nice to him.
Exactly, but I don't think he ever really had a huge romantic interest for her.
Maybe just a small,
like a crush sort of thing.
But I don't think that he actually said that he loved her.
No. So there's a little given.
And any love he probably had for her was just the first person who ever cared for him back. The only other people he knew in his life was the priest and Frollo. Come to think of it, I think Frollo is the worst villain ever. And by the worst, I mean the best written villain who is the worst of the best villain. You know what I mean. He is the best well-written villain that you absolutely hate.
Also, did anyone notice how 2 of the 3 gargoyles are named Victor and Hugo, and the author of Hunchback of Notre Dame is Victor Hugo?
Wait, really?
Lol, Disney, like just lol. I literally figured that out while writing this. It was crazy.
It's sad that Disney doesn't go into darker themes like they used to. Nowadays, their movies are so sugar-coated and pretty, they look like candy.
When the darker themes were actually more interesting to watch.
So let us know what you think about Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Do you think it's actually great that they dive into deeper themes such as this? Or do you prefer the sugar-coated ones?
Let us know in the comments down below, and until then, we'll see you in our next video. Bye! No, you're the big fat one with the stupid ideas.